So today we're going to talk a little more about the autofocus on the Fujifilm X-T3 with some older lenses. Alright guys, so welcome back to the channel. This is Dylan Golby, photographer here in Seoul again. We're going to talk a little bit more about the Fujifilm X-T3 today. And just as a bit of a heads up to everybody, before the comments explode like they did last time, the X-T3 is officially out in Korea. This is a production model with the final firmware. So we've been using it for around about a week now. And yesterday we went out and did a couple of basic AF tests with some of the older lenses when compared to the X-T2. So my main use for the camera is in single point, single AF. So we didn't test really that far in depth with the tracking, but we did do a couple of basic sort of running and erratic tracking tests to see how much it had improved. So let's start with the single point, single AF tests. Now the three lenses that I used are these guys, which is number one, the 56mm 1.2, number two, the 35mm 1.4, and number three, that's the wrong lens. Number three, if I can grab it, is the 23mm 1.4. Now these are all older lenses in the Fujifilm lineup. In fact, the 35mm is one of the first ones they released, was in that original Trinity, and they've always been a little bit prone to hunting. They've been a little bit slower to focus than some of the new modern zooms or some of the f2 primes. So I really wanted to test these and see how much they'd improved. So let me put those down for just a moment. Okay, so the two bodies that we tested on were my old beta of an X-T2. This is the one that I purchased right when it came out. This is one of those cameras that really doesn't owe me much. It's been around the block a few times in a couple of typhoons, but it still works just fine. Here is the brand new X-T3, and we pitted these two against each other for these tests. Now, so on our first test, what we did was we got a few different objects that were of different reflectiveness, different levels of contrast. So we chose a rocket blower, because it's pure black. We chose a packet of Fisherman's Friends because I quite like them and they happen to be one around. We chose a bottle of lens fluid, and we also had a box of Acros 100 film. And so we put those things onto the table at different distances and moved the focus points around to basically lock on to each one of them. And with the two end subjects, which was the Acros film on the left and the rocket blower on the right, I actually put them outside of the X-T2's PDAF range. So they were in the contrast detect areas of the Fujifilm X-T2 sensor, and hopefully that would trip up the X-T2 a little bit. And as we noticed, and you will see in just a moment, it did give it a bit of a hard time, even on the high contrast Acros box. So let's jump right into those. The first lens that we tested was my favorite, the 35mm 1.4, and we started with the X-T3. And as you'll be able to see in this next little clip, it has absolutely no trouble locking on to each of those objects really, really quickly, and with a little bit of hunting here and there, but it's mostly gone. And I think especially with the sides of the frame, that is due to the new PDAF sensors. So check those out.
Okay.
Okay, next up I'm going to show you exactly the same test but with the X-T2. And what you'll notice with the X-T2 is that it does take a little bit longer to acquire focus, and it does hunt quite a bit with this lens. So you'll see it going in and out, in and out, in and out before it actually locks onto the subject. So check that out here. All right, so next up, I think we'll show you the one that I felt maybe had the biggest difference in autofocus here, and that was the 23mm 1.4. And I really think that this shows you just how much the X-T3's newer processor and newer PDAF points actually help to even make the older lenses really, really quick and really, really useful. So let's take a look at both of those now. Okay, so the final lens was the 56mm 1.2, and I think you're going to see pretty much exactly the same thing again. The X-T3 tends to lock on things a lot more confidently, whereas the X-T2 hunts around a little bit and sometimes misses. So let's take a look at those. All right, so what you've seen here is a pretty basic, non-scientific test of the X-T3 and the X-T2's autofocus systems. This is more of a real-world example. It was a cloudy day, as you could probably see in there, so there wasn't a lot of contrast in the light anyway. So it's, it's a reasonable real-world situation that we might all shoot in quite a bit. So what you will have noticed, though, is that the X-T3 focuses a lot more confidently and a lot more quickly with these lenses. So you can only imagine that with the f2 lenses or with the pro zooms, the 16 to 55 or the 50 to 140, that it is extremely fast now. Okay, so the one thing we didn't test with this was in really, really low light. And if a lot of you guys are interested in that, I'd be happy to do a couple more tests. But we just wanted to show you the basic differences between the X-T2 and the X-T3 in terms of single point autofocus. Okay, so the next thing that we did was to go down to my local stream. My intern Hannah and I went down there and we set up a couple of tests to see how well the autofocus, the tracking system, would work in the T3 versus in the T2, and with a fast-moving, erratic-moving subject. So we sort of ran and jumped here and there to see how much of a difference there would be in these autofocus systems. And the differences, again, I mean, the T3, newer, faster processor, more PDAF points, it's likely to win this test, and it did. We were using the 56mm 1.2, by the way, so one of the slowest lenses. And what we came across was that on the edges of the frame, the X-T2, again, with its contrast detect, tends to lose subjects pretty quickly, whereas the X-T3 is able to keep up all the way across the frame with all of its PDAF points. So if you're tracking moving subjects on the sides of your frames, if you're shooting sports or something like that, the X-T3 is probably going to be a pretty good upgrade. Grab it and test it for yourself. I'm sure you'll love it. Okay, so let's take a look now at the frames that we shot, and I'll put an O on the screen if it was in focus and an X if it was out of focus. So let's start with the X-T2 and then we'll move on to the X-T3. I've done 25 images for each and we'll give a final score at the end. Again, in no way is this a scientific test. This is a real-world test. It's something that I might encounter when I'm out photographing children. They run around and I'd like to be able to track them. And I found that the X-T3, spoiler alert, does a better job. Okay, in this final test, one of the comments, or a couple of the comments on my previous video were asking about the iDetect AF and how well it works on the X-T3. I don't really have a basis with which to compare it because I don't use the function a lot, but we did get out and do a few tests that we'll show you right here in the video. But what we found was that it was extremely good at tracking faces all over the frame, which of course the X-T2 again, especially if you're in constant high, it won't use the contrast detect on the side, so you can't track the sides of the frame. But it did manage to track Hannah as she moved left and right really quite quickly. It even followed her eye along. And the only thing that really tripped it up was when she stepped out of the frame, changed her distance to the camera, and stepped back into the frame. It had a hell of a time trying to find her after we did that. So that's just a basic test. Take a look at it now. Okay, so that's Hannah running away from the bug. I hope that it's helpful to you. Again, this is not a function I really use, so I'm not going to test it really deeply. There are plenty of channels out there who will do some really in-depth tests with these things. The one thing I will say is it doesn't quite feel as confident as some of the Sony cameras that I've used in terms of tracking faces. All right, guys, so that wraps up our short test of the X-T3's autofocus system. These are just some basic real-world things, as I said. I think that if you want to really understand the autofocus system and how well it's going to work for you, the best option you have is to head down to your local camera store when they get one in, pick it up, put your lenses on it, and have a play. That's the only way you'll really feel whether it's going to be a big improvement for you or not. So thanks again for watching. If you've enjoyed, please subscribe. Leave a comment below if there's anything else you'd like me to talk about in a future video about the X-T3. And please give us a thumbs up. I'd really appreciate it. Thank you.